Thank you for joining us at the Lacuna Writers Room. You were just listening to an original composition by Ryan Franks with vocals by Nina Story. I am Christopher Gray. I am an author. I'm a game designer. What's something else about me? I just went to the opera last night and saw Madame Butterfly for the first time. Definitely
How
not.
was it?
It was not an upper. It was. It was a. It was definitely not an upper. It was very emotional, very well done. With me is Danny DeLisle. Danny, tell the folks about
No.
yourself.
I'm a writer, a gamer, an actress, and thing about me is yesterday was my birthday. Yay!
Oh my God. Now we
Yes.
know what your sign
25,
is.
25. At 25.
Yeah, 25.
Again, for 20
You're looking
years.
good for 25.
Thank you.
It was
Thank you.
the line from The Great Gatsby that my wife always cites. I try to remember what it is. 20 years too old to know it. I forget what it is. I'm going to mess it up, so I'll have to look it up. Should not have even brought it up. Anyway,
25 with 20 years experience.
Yeah.
There we go. That's what I am. 25 with 20 years experience.
That's awesome. We are in the Lacuna Writers Room. We have accomplished a lot to this point. We've been building a setting, and if you don't know what the setting is, it's probably good to go see some of the earlier episodes. On YouTube, I set up a playlist called the World Building Playlist, and that's where I think there's 4 or 5 episodes where it's just about building this setting. The setting is Adala, which is actually Atlantis, but that's what it was called back then.
I still like that name.
I love it.
Adala.
And the city is Atlantis.
Atlantis.
And that is the city of Atlantis. And we have kind of teed up enough for us to start writing stories. Now, I wanted to say that, there's probably listeners out there, you know who you are. Out of the many, many dozens of listeners, you know who you are, where you're thinking, well, why are we going through all of this effort just to write stories? I mean, can't you just write the story? Do you need to spend hours upon hours of stream time unpacking things like languages and, culture? And the answer is no, you don't. You can just keep writing. But the reason we're doing this is because this is a setting that we intend to share with anybody who wants to participate in the setting. So there does need to be a certain amount of due diligence, since it's not just me writing it, it's not just Danny writing it. It's actually going to be a setting that is available through Creative Commons, so anybody can write in this setting. And you can even work with us on writing canon for the setting. And so because of that, and we're anticipating other people working in here, we have to kind of do it in a more systematic way. But what would you say, Danny, to somebody who says, do I have to do all this world building work before I start writing?
I mean, you don't have to. I mean, I suppose. That's what I'm going to tell. I mean, some people just sit down and boom, and here we are. But I think you benefit from it. So I would encourage people to do it at least somewhat if you're in a world that is different somehow, so that everything seems to make internal cohesive sense, right? Because even when we're talking about sci-fi or we're talking about fantasy, where the world's, or even horror, where you've got supernatural or technology, or you've got government systems that aren't like our own, the things still need to make internal sense for the world, right? So if you have a king in your world, and then some other place has a president, well, why? Why don't they have a king? Why isn't it all kingdoms? Why do they have a president instead? Is that, it's things you need to think about to make sure that people aren't going to read it and be like, what the heck? And just throw them completely out of what you're doing. Um, that's the reason for it. Going along in something that you've said for however many pages all of a sudden doesn't work because you've done something else. Um, we've all read books where that has happened. So I think it's beneficial for you to sit there and at least, I mean, it doesn't it how long it that takes is how long your story and how complicated the thing you're introducing to the world is. If it's mostly our world except for this one thing, vampires exist, okay, well, you pretty much got everything down then, but then you just have to think about how the vampires work in the world that you've created. So, but if you're Tolkien, it might take a little longer,
Right, right.
and I
And
remember,
he set out to make an entire mythology, which is sort of what we're
right,
doing.
right. And I
Um,
remember one of
yeah.
my favorite interviews with him is this guy who's asking him, oh, so you kind of created like the whole world of the Hobbit and all of this before you started writing the stories. And Tolkien's like, yeah. And the interview asked him why, and Tolkien's response basically jotted down to, I don't know, man.
Mm.
Oh,
I think there is a risk of over engineering on the world
mhm.
building part, and I've done that. I think it's because I love to world build, so I tend to just go, really deep on stuff that has absolutely no relevance or significance, and you can end up building to the point where you don't need to write because you have just built it all, and
Right.
it's sort of, I've gotten to that before. And so there's an ethos that Danny and I have learned in the game design world. It's this idea of playing to find out, because if you are creating nothing but world building and everything that possibly could happen in this world, then you have it all before you start writing, and so you don't get to find anything out, so nothing new, you don't discover anything. And I think writing is about discovery, and so you almost want to build enough so that you have a stage set, and now you can play to find out what happens. And
Mhm.
that's, I think there's a balance. World building on of it in of itself can just be an activity. I mean, I could go on and build world. In fact, that's why I like game design, because I can build a lot
Mhm.
of worlds without
And
having to
there are
do anything
games
with
out
them.
there that are literally just, hey, build this world.
Yeah,
There's
there's
card games
there's
and
one in
board games.
particular.
Yeah.
I want to get Kimmy on, Kimmy Hughes, who did the Decima game, which is
Mhm.
entirely a world building game. I want to get her on because it's she can walk us through her game and how it works, and it's a great tool for world building. But yeah, I mean, it can be a whole thing. That's
I have
all
a
you do.
copy. It's wonderful.
Oh yeah, it's a great game. It's built on a tarot
She
deck,
won
which
an
is,
Emmy for it, I
oh yeah,
think. Well
yeah,
deserved too.
oh
So
yeah, yeah.
yeah.
And I hear there are more on the way. So if you're looking
Ooh.
to buy a copy of Decima, go to Golden Lasso Games,
Mhm.
which is a Wonder Woman reference,
Nod.
and then
Yep.
you will find Decima and you can buy it.
Yep.
Anyway,
They even
uh,
have a beautiful mat too. I don't know if she has any
yes.
more of those yet, but there's a mat to do yours. Yeah, it's great. But there are games out there that are literally just world building, and some of the RPG games, like the ones I've been like Star Trek, some of the most recent Modifius games like Star Trek Dune, Fallout, have a portion of the game where you world build with your group
Mm,
as to what's happened like before the game starts. I'm getting recently to do Dune, and part of the game is coming up with your house and coming up with the planet that you're from and all this stuff. So even more RPG games where it was kind of just make your character, more and more of them these days are having you do background stuff and having you do, hey, how do you guys know each other beforehand? Or, you know, stuff like that. They're incorporating it more as a part of the game instead of just something they'd say, oh, you can do this if you want before you play. I think now, because like in the original D&D and back in the old school days of White Wolf and TSR and all that stuff, they didn't really have that.
right.
That wasn't really a part of that game. It was you make your character, you meet in a tavern, or you meet at the Elysium, and here we go.
And then
We're
what would
off.
happen is that the fiction would define the world, and that would be canon, and so they'd have to integrate the fiction into the games. And I think that that play to find out ethos is important in our case. I think it's important in general when world building for fiction that you don't go overboard, because when you get to the table to write, you've already determined everything, and so there's no discovery. It's much harder to write with those confines, that confined space. But if you haven't come up with enough, you're going to spend your writing time world building, and so then that's going to compromise your storytelling. So there's a balance.
It's this wire. Yeah, it's this wire you got to walk between building enough so that I'm excited to write it, I'm ready to write it, I know enough to write it, but not so much that I'm like, oh, I entertain myself. Now we're on to the next thing.
But with the play to find out ethos, you just have enough to set the stage, and then the canon, you will, or the world building will often come out of the fiction that you write. And we have to be a little different at Lacuna because we're trying to have a shared space in the setting. So while the play to find out is going to apply to us too, I think we do need to tighten it a little more before we can even write, because it's a shared setting, and we have to really have to get the ducks in a row. We have to understand not the whole thing, but we have to understand the stuff that's surrounding the particular story we're writing, at least that, and then we can figure out other things later. And that's probably a good point too. You want to start small within the ecosystem of your particular story instead of going over it. Now, we did go big because we had to know some of the big stuff even before we could think about the stories. But now that we have the big stuff, and they are very broad stroked, and now that we have the big stuff, we're going to focus on this one story about Hermes and Hermes' origin story, their origin story. And because they're twins.
Yeah.
Although it occurs to me, are they? Maybe they just present themselves as twins. I don't know. But maybe. So Danny's writing this story, and there's already, just in the conception phase, a lot of questions that need to be answered before you can get ink to paper. Is that fair?
Right. Yeah. What we had discussed last time is this story is going to be about the twins, which we can discuss kind of how that is and stuff, who are going to be kind of the trickster gods, or known as, one of, I mean, they might be, have a few names, and, some of them are kind of the same person as trickster gods, or the twins share. And there's like another one who is like another trickster god. We don't know, but this particular iteration is the kind of origin of like Hermes and the Greek Hermes stories, and how they go through the trials to become immortal. And what we had talked about was that the two things that have to be there for the trial is you have to kind of deconstruct yourself. And we talked about how that can mean a lot of things. Can mean dying, can mean just, but I have that story down as Dionysus just orgying himself into immortality, because that amuses me so much.
Hilarious.
But it can look a lot of ways. Maybe you just meditate. Who knows? But it's a lot of different things. But in this particular time, since it's taking place in Atlantis, it was kind of like this big ceremony, this kind of ritual sacrifice ceremony. And the idea that we had was Apollo's child is getting ready to go through this, and the twins decide they're going to take over and go through the trials themselves, as they have been denied before going through it, I imagined. So that's where we're starting. And then once they get through the trials are going to be very much kind of, we've talked about how in a lot of things like Joseph Campbell's Thousand Faces, or a lot of underworld, going into the underworld tellings, they kind of have this process that they go through. And I want to encourage people to think about those in different ways. Like, what does that, it says, oh, they go through the gate, but what does that mean? That can mean a lot of things. Be creative with it. How does that work? Oh, they have to make a choice. How is that choice presented? What choice is it? So
it's interesting that now that Chaos is out, it's so funny that the show came out as we were doing this, because there's so many similarities to what we're
Yeah,
trying to
yeah,
do.
yeah.
And if you,
Encourage
I mean,
everybody to watch it.
yeah, if
It's
you're
it's
into this
really
at
good.
all, watch Chaos. I mean, it's almost like, let's stop Lacuna because they just did it. You know, they did it way better than we. It's really, really good.
No, no,
But
no.
it's but you know, their representation of crossing over the Styx, for example,
Yeah.
it doesn't have to be a creepy old guy on a rowboat. You know,
No, it was
it
like a
could,
big cruise ship or
yeah, like
something.
a cruise ship, right? Yeah, or and
Ferry.
then yeah, and then there was the ferryman was on like a little tugboat, right? And it was
Yeah.
I don't know. The point is that it's architecture, not reality. Like it may save the same purpose, but they has different forms. And that's one of the things we kind of need. I mean, you have kind of a daunting task in a way, because you're going to be the first to write and visualize what Atlantis looks like, what they're wearing, you know, what the feel, the vibe is.
Mhm.
And you know, there's, if it was just a sole writer, you would just do it, but now you're kind of working in this community, and so
Right.
you're going to have to be, you're really the first to lay down canon beyond our conceptual stuff.
Mhm.
So a lot of what you put in this story, no pressure, is going to be what defines all of the other stories.
That's kind of like when someone says no offense before they say something offensive. No pressure before they put pressure on you.
Here's a whole bunch of pressure. So, you know, I'm comfortable with taking as much time as we need to help work through this stuff. And I'm comfortable with just following your lead, since you're the first on this. And you know, it's like, okay, it's like improv, where, you know, one of the key ethoses of improv is yes and, which is also a good ethos in role-playing games. But the idea is that you're going to create something, and I can't down the stream negate what you created. I can add to it and maybe augment it, and we all can always talk about what's the term about the untrusty narrator, and different perceptions of the same story. And so there's I think some wiggle room about the truth that you set in the story. But
Right.
the fact is, you know, going forward, that happened. The thing that you wrote happened, and it's canon and it's true. So you know, we might mess with perspectives and everything else, but that's going to be the bottom line. So all that said, you know, what is it that you would like to unpack together? I think there's things like names, places, you know.
Yes. So the things that we have the twins themselves, so they'll need names. We'll definitely have Zeus involved, and Apollo. And Apollo's child, whichever child that's going to be. We will have, where, as for places that are going to be in the story, we will have the first scene where the twins meet, wherever that's going to be, to kind of talk about what they're going to do and kind of set the scene and what their relationship is, and all of that. And then we will have kind of the ceremony itself that is happening. So we kind of have to envision, like, back in these days when Atlantis was still a thing, and how did they do this ceremony? How did the gods do it? You know, them coming from another, how did that work? So it's going to be visualized. And I initially had, I mean, all the stuff that's in kind of Egyptian culture, Babylonian culture, Greek culture, you know, it all had to come from somewhere. So my initial thought is I'll kind of pull heavily from all of that in terms of what this ceremony is.
Yeah.
What the intent of the ceremony is, when they intend to happen versus what the twins do to, you know, not make that happen. So then there's that. And then, of course, there's going to be like the trials and how that works. And that's going to be the third part of the story. So kind of 3 parts to it at this point.
Yeah. And there's also the I guess the who's who of Atlantis are going to be there, because this happens after the elders are overthrown, but
Mhm.
before the big diaspora. So this is sort of
Right.
the beginnings of maybe the golden age of who would become referred to as the Olympians.
Mhm.
So is there's also mythology around Atlantis to take into account.
Mhm.
Like this is Poseidon's city,
Mhm.
and there's things to do with horses and dolphins and and then everything that goes with Poseidon.
Mhm.
There's also what Plato wrote about Atlantis, which in architecture, that it was a circular city that had canals connecting different rings.
Mhm.
And then there's what Edgar Casey said about Atlantis, and then there's somewhere in between. We have kind of charted out the geography of Atlantis, and I even have maps, but it's really easy to visualize. If you can visualize the Mid-Atlantic Ridge and you see the underwater maps of the ridge in the middle of the Atlantic, it's kind of like this very elongated, pear-shaped mountain range. If that was elevated above the sea, that's what Atlantis looks like. And
Mhm.
so you have a very mountainous top region. You have the range going all the way down to the south, kind of sneaking through the Atlantic, and it goes really far past the equator, and it goes really far north of the equator. So it's a pretty large continent, and it has lowlands in the middle. So you can imagine that Atlantis is probably going to be sort of in the middle. It might be, if not subtropical, maybe warmer. It
Mhm.
might be more like Texas than like Iowa,
Right.
and it might be, and I'm just throwing things out there, but just picturing the geography. If there's a large continent in the middle of the ocean, that Gulf Stream doesn't exist anymore. So the temperature is going to be closer to what the United States is than what Europe is today.
Mhm.
So that's just something to keep in mind. And then there's the access to the American continent and the European continent. It's going to be real easy from either side of
Mhm.
Atlantis. So there's probably going to be seafaring. So these are all things to keep in mind when picturing where we are. I
Right.
imagine that the city is probably coastal.
Mhm.
If you just look at how societies tend to form,
Right.
the alternative would be that it was on a river, or maybe both.
Mhm.
Maybe it's coastal and on a river. Um, and then does it need fortifications or not? It,
Mhm.
I don't know. I'm not sure. I know how to answer that. And what do they do for leisure? And one of the things that stands out that I'd like to seed is the idea of the bathhouse as kind of a universal idea in these antique antiquity societies, and that was sort of the common meeting place.
Mhm.
Um, so that would, I think there should be a bathhouse. And that's like one of the things I'm weirdly certain about. Um, but if there's a bathhouse, then we can really play with water. Maybe there's a mighty river that flows through the bathhouse, that
Mhm.
empties into a tributary. And there's, the idea of the Colossus and having a port. I don't know. I'm just throwing out a bunch of, when I think about the geography, those are the things that come to
Oh
mind.
yeah. Well, I mean, if you're thinking of bathhouse, I mean, you could think of something like, I mean, if especially if you're talking about the Olympians, and you're going to set something there, they probably have their own little bathhouse, and I imagine it has their own like waterfall in the bathhouse where the whole thing comes, and it's super super luxe and everything like that.
Yeah. There was, I should look this up. Edgar Casey talked about a mighty river going through Atlantis, which wouldn't be inconsistent with what Plato said, because Plato was all about, like, there was all these canals and there's symmetry in how it was built. But I think it'd be cool if it was like a New Orleans sort of situation where the city was built at the mouth of a river, or at the delta of a river,
Hmm.
into the ocean. And it would make sense that if it was on I guess, the east side, since they tend to go to places like, I don't know, the Mediterranean. Um, but that would also feed bathhouses.
Yeah.
especially if it
Cool.
was kind of at a mountain range where a waterfall was pouring into the. Yeah, I don't know. I think I'm just rambling at this point. Let's just stop and hear what you have to say.
Yeah, no, that sounds cool. I think it's good that we kind of just talk about our own ideas before I start, writing stuff at how we envision it. So, I mean, much like with the ritual, I kind of envisioned it as, that stuff has to go from somewhere, like in our world, like the Egyptian, Babylonian, Sumerian, Greek, all that stuff comes from somewhere. So I imagine that it's not that different than that, you know what I mean? Like in terms of like the buildings and how they're built and the bathhouses and you know, uh, building on the river and castle on the hill, like that sort of stuff, like it's going to be very similar to either, ancient Egypt, ancient Greece, because even though it's kind of before, this is where a lot of that stuff is coming from.
Yeah,
So,
yeah. There's a good, kind of the culture of it. What do you think the buildings are made of?
probably, I mean, I imagine stone. I mean, that's a lot of what the Egyptians and Greeks, I mean, used. Marbles,
If it's a
more.
mountainous region, they would have access to a lot of stone,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
and it's probably
Oh,
volcanic.
I have an idea.
Hmm.
I have an idea. Right? There's Mount Olympus, right? What if that whole palace is like built into the mountain of like where like the gods live or they live. It's kind of like built into the side of the mountain almost.
Like
And
Mesa
that's kind of
Verde.
where Mount Olympus and all that comes from. And it kind of looks out over the delta and the ocean and everything like that, and it's got these like balconies, and it's basically just like carved, out of the mountain itself,
I love it. I love it. Yeah, it's like the cliff dwellers of Mesa Verde.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's a really cool idea. And
You
then,
know.
and so that's where the fortunate people live, but then the unfortunates probably live in the village below
Yeah.
or the city, I guess.
Right. And maybe it kind of like tears up a little bit, like there's tears, you know what I mean? Kind of a
Yeah.
little like Minas Tirith, where it's like, the palace is like way up at the top and everything, but like some of the richer residents or whatever might have their, houses and stuff built a little ways up onto the mountain or whatever, you know.
So, I think the Azores are a good place to look for when it comes to geology, because the Azores would have been the highest peaks of Adala if it sank,
Yeah.
right? And so I did a quick look, and it looks like the Azores are primarily volcanic in origin, which makes sense. And so you're dealing with basalt and
Right.
pumice and lighter stones. So that, yeah, it would be really easy to carve into a mountain made of that.
Hmm. Right. Yeah, I mean, there's basalt thrones, and there's all sorts of stuff that people did make out of basalt because it does, it is malleable more than some other stones, and
Yeah.
yeah,
All right. Yeah, I love it. I think that
yeah,
that gave me a pretty clear picture of what Atlantis would look like.
right. So if you're kind of picturing like let's say you're looking at it from the ocean, you're on a boat and you're heading there, and you're looking at it, what you would see is like the shoreline with the delta and entrances of the ocean and the river flowing in and out of various points, and then of course you've got docks and you've got all that stuff kind of spread out heading towards the mountain, which you can see in the distance. So the mountain range, and you can see the palace, or what is compound, whatever they're going to call it, or how they're going to use it, and you kind of see that up there with like some nicer houses below it of maybe like favored mortals or something are allowed to live just below at the foot of the mountain or whatever.
Yeah, it's maybe it's a ziggurat, basically.
Mm, mm, yeah.
There's here's what a basalt column cliff looks like. Wouldn't it be cool if it was made out of this sort of dark gray? I'm showing a picture for those of you that are listening of the Isle of Mull, which I've never heard of this place before, but it has columnar basalt, which is a dark gray stone, and the sea has kind of whittled away at the stone to make it in the shape of columns. It looks really cool. But when you think of Atlantis, you think of the bright gleaming marble. Wouldn't it be cool if it was like this sort of dark gray basalt?
Yeah. I mean, that's this is gonna a gaming story, but I did a vampire game, and one of the vampire NPCs had like this basalt throne, and I chose it because it was kind of a dark stone, and it was kind of something you could easily find by the ocean, where they were and everything like that. So he had this throne carved out of basalt and everything. But of course, and there's caves and everything that you could play with and everything.
Oh, this makes sense. I'm looking at a picture of Iceland, and there's a lot of basalt in Iceland. Of course, there is.
Yeah.
And Iceland would be on the verges of where our continent is. So I bet it looks a lot like Iceland.
Right. Oh, well, that means we've also got hot springs.
Well, yes, we would, because it's very volcanic. And there's earthquakes. We already established there are earthquakes.
Yep. So there's going to be hot springs, and there's going to be that sort of stuff there as well.
Here's a picture of basalt columns where there's a waterfall cutting through them. This is really cool. This is why I love world building. You come upon this stuff. I didn't know this stuff existed. I think this is in Iceland.
Yeah. So I think I have a good image kind of how that, that might work from what I've said. I can have the twins meeting, somewhere in the city or outside of it, perhaps somewhere else. I don't know if that matters so much. But then when they come into the city, they're coming in for the ceremony, and so basically, so that means we're going to have some kind of, like, they have their compound and everything, this kind of like inside, on top of the mountain or whatever. But there's also going to be a place where these ceremonies are held. There's going to be like a temple, like a shrine type thing, where all the mortals can come and watch the gods be gods or whatever, because they're not going to have them come up to the palace or whatever.
Right.
So there's also going to be some kind of where they come down from there and address the people, and
there would be a promenade. And torches and stuff. The one of the things that's in common, I might be talking out of my ass here. We might want to fact check this, but I believe it's common in antiquity that temples were built with an outer court and an inner court. And the outer court was for the public and the inner court was for the priests. And so that would make sense that there was a temple, but there's, you were allowed in this area, but you couldn't go further up.
Right.
And then, the gods would descend down to you.
Right.
And that's where they would sacrifice the calves, and
Yeah, there's all sorts of, this is cool. So which means there's probably all sorts of like little secret passageways and stuff like they used to have in old castles, so that the king and queen and whatever wouldn't have to like walk through the rooms to everybody. You know what I mean?
Right.
So the gods would definitely have like their own like little elevator or stairs or passageway from the palace to this temple, so that they could just appear and whatever, and they don't actually have to like walk through the masses, if that's how you're thinking they are.
I
mean,
think
if they're more
and there's probably
but traditionally the gods were not like that.
Right. No, I think you're right. I mean, there would be for the big and wealthy would do that, and were the rulers. But there's also probably a promenade or a colonnade that goes up to their domain down to the temple, that they would they would do parade or something, or a promenade
Yeah.
down. But if you're like the big rulers or the the big gods, you probably wouldn't. You would. I love the idea of having these secret passages when you could just kind of show up
Right.
and for the right moment and then leave.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
That would happen. And then of course, they've got like, the big, huge, massive staircase leading up there, where they want to, like if they're doing a big parade or something, like, so they come down in all their glory with all the, whatever, and pomp and circumstance and all that, but then they've got the temple or the public place where people can go. And I can imagine it being a situation where, let's say one of the gods wanted to have like a discussion with a mortal for some reason. They'd send a message like via one of the priests, oh, you're wanted at the temple for prayer, or you're wanted for this, that, and the other. And they would go, and they'd go into like the confessional, and holy crap, it's Hera, sitting there wanting to talk to you. You know what I mean? Like she can just kind of like appear, and they can have this. So they have their methods for if they want to be seen, and they want to have all the, whatever, but they also have these passageways and ways that they can like just appear and do their private communications or whatever they want to do.
So if
How do you
Olympia
feel
is
about that?
I think that's great, and I just kind of want to look at. I'm a visual person, so I'm looking at these cliff dwellings. Mesa Verde. I actually went to college. I met my wife at a college nearby Mesa Verde. It is one of the coolest. If you ever are in Southwest Colorado or in the Southwest in general, it is worth the trip. It is one of the coolest things I've ever seen.
I'm in Phoenix, so we got all sorts of stuff around here.
Yeah, and these cliff dwellings, I'm trying to find a big picture of it. These cliff dwellings are all built into the cliffs, and they're whole cities, and they're way bigger than even the pictures make them out to be. But if this is kind of what you're thinking, is this sort of what you were thinking?
Kind of, yeah.
And then if that's kind of if this is built into the mountains, then they have the stairs would be built into the mountains as well.
Yeah, these are more for because I'm thinking, like the like this would be for like more of like the common, like people every day maybe living at the base of the mountain or whatever,
right.
Might have a place in there. But I'm thinking for like, the higher ups, their facade might be more along the lines of like, do you remember in Indiana Jones and the Temple and the Holy Church of the Holy Grail?
Right. It's
where they go in and there's that carved into, you know what I mean? Like
it's on the tip of my tongue. It starts with a P. It'll come to me.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's
that the palace and stuff would be more carved like that. Petra. It would have a hugely ornate carved like facade into the side of the mountain. Maybe even a statue carved on either side of the entrance to the palace or something, with like gold that you can see like from the ocean, perhaps. Maybe that's also sort of like the lighthouse as well, like on the top of the mountain, like there's a statue, that's kind of, there or something like that. So
I'm showing I guess I'm showing the cliff dwellings first, but you're talking about Petra and trying to figure out how to work this. And that would be awesome. I'm just going to show it. If you're listening and you haven't heard of it, check it out. But it's the big temple on the Last Crusade at the end.
Yeah, I mean, it's a real place. It's a real archaeological site.
This is what it looks like. Yeah, it was a big trade center.
It is. Let me see. We're talking about.
I can imagine what that was like in the ancient world.
Right,
But yeah, that would be awesome. Okay, I think I'm 100% aligned with what you're talking
that's
about.
what I'm thinking. Like,
Yeah.
yes, yeah, there it is. Petra, yeah. So I'm thinking it'd be a facade more like that, but imagine that with the basalt, like
Right. At the
dark,
top of a mountain
yeah,
with
at the top of
staircase
a
going
mountain,
down. Yeah.
dark basalt with steps and possibly gold in it,
Hmm.
statues on either side or something like that. What do
Oh,
you
there
think?
was
Yeah.
in terms of yeah, gold for sure, but there's got to be something that just triggered a memory about Atlantis and a gemstone, and I'm trying to remember now what gemstone it was. It might be lapis, but it'd be cool to find a gemstone that was common in Adala that's not so common elsewhere. And we can just make that up, but there's a trigger of a memory. There's a gemstone that's associated with Atlantis.
Basalt gemstones. You can find sapphire, zircon, garnet, augite, brown peridot, feldspar, and highlight opal. Opal is beautiful, one of my favorite stones. And I did actually write a story about a palace that was much like this, that had opal veins in it, and the whole things were carved out of like opal, kind of it's opalescent, kind of whatever.
Opal it is. That sounds great.
Yeah, so just imagine like a facade like the one we showed, made out of basalt with opal and gold possibly
Nice.
in it.
All right.
That's very impressive.
Yeah, that is really cool. So, all right, I think that you probably have enough. I don't want to speak for
Yeah,
you,
I have
but
enough to kind of get
like I
Atlantis.
could start writing now if this would be
Very
cool.
cool.
So you also need to figure out names, right?
I need names. That's the next thing that I kind of need to figure out of what are we calling these folks? We know what we call them in Greek, but what are we calling these folks?
Yeah. Let's look at the etymology first of Hermes. Let's see. The name Hermes is Mycenaean Hermahas, and it is it's derived from the Greek, which means stone heap.
Yeah, because remember I told you that story of last time about them throwing the stones because they were voting, because he was like, I'm a baby, I couldn't possibly have done this, and so they threw stones until he was practically covered and only his little head was sticking out. And so its cairns or whatever were often built on crossroads and stuff, and it was said that they were Hermes was inside them and he would see you safely on the air travels and stuff. So that was the thing that people did.
Okay. I am stone heap stone heap.
I'm heap of stone.
All right, let's work on this a bit. I'm gonna share my screen again, and we're gonna look at the I'm building a what is it called when we I've lost all the words. I have no more words. We're just gonna move forward without any words.
We used everything up imagining basalt palaces.
Right. I'm completely stumped. I'm just trying to find the program here. There it is. I think whiteboard was the word I was looking for. So I'm setting up a whiteboard. We know that Hermes means stone heap. So it doesn't have to be a word that means stone heap necessarily, but
it's a place to
it's a place to start. Yeah. If we look at what is Akkadian for stone, Naru is Akkadian for stone.
Oh, that's
and
cool.
Akkadian word for pile, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
Or pile of stone that came up in.
What's the word for pile of stone?
Don't know. It came up in the search, but then it was like not giving me anything.
Oh, okay.
Wonder if I thought I had bookmarked the Akkadian dictionary, but maybe not. And again, we don't necessarily want to use it word for word, but if we can find something that looks good.
Yeah. Naru was also the name
Pile
of
of
the
bricks
main
was
character in
Amaru.
Prey, the Predator movie, the most recent one.
Amaru means a pile of bricks.
Amaru.
This is Amaru, actually, looking at it. I'm going to put the definitions here. Pile of bricks. I'm in caps lock on accident. Another interesting word is dimtu, which is a tower or a pile. EC2 is a pyramid or castle.
Oh.
Kameru is to pile up or to heap up.
I kind of like Dimtu and Ishatu. Like, I'm picturing, like, the parent named them after, like, where she wanted them to go. You know what I mean? Like, you're going to live in the palace. You're going to live in a castle. You're going to live in a tower. You know, you're going to ascend, right? So I kind of like those two.
The other thing I wanted to check was what we had done some work on the language of Atlantis, and there might be something in there we can take. And if we're going to make it ours, we'll probably want this to be reminiscent of our word, but not the exact word.
Right.
So I'm just going to pull up another document here.
Yeah.
So the one thing I wanted to look at was gender. In the language that we were building, Nesh, if you were to use Nesh as a prefix or a suffix, that would genderize it as a they, them pronoun.
Okay.
If you were to use well, actually, it looks like he or she is both NE, so I don't know if that was a mistake or not. But we might want to come up with different suffixes and prefixes for he and she. But in other words, you conjugate the root word with the suffixes and prefixes in order to give it a gender.
Okay.
So if we wanted to do Deem2, you said, or EC2.
Yeah. Ishitas.
Isitesh, which is not a good name.
Ishitash or Tush or just Ishitash.
Yeah, it's not good. It doesn't sound good. We can
This is the process, people. Yeah. This is the process. I had, you know, friendship babies and stuff. I had someone who would shout the name across the house to see if they got sick of it, if they had to shout the name a million times. They'd be like, Rebecca!
Yeah,
no,
we want to. We want
to. Sick of it. I wanted to see, do I still like the name? If I have to shout it a million. I said, you know, that's not a bad idea.
It's a great idea. So it's got to be something that doesn't sound too hard. I mean, like it's not. It's obviously going to be unfamiliar language-wise, but it shouldn't be like. It should have the same kind of as Hermes does, right?
Yeah.
I don't think that works. Demesh.
The mesh.
That's if we wanted to do they them. If we wanted to do, it could be. I think we have to figure out the she he pronouns, because I have them both here as ne, but that doesn't work. Why would you have the same pronoun for, especially when you have a they?
Right.
So let's say that. Let's just try out a pronoun en, or sorry, ne would be for he, and then maybe en for he she. So I'm just thinking out loud. But if we did it ends with an e is masculine, but it ends with an n is feminine. That would be Dimin and
Ishitin. Yeah.
Oh, you want to look at Isitin and Isite. I don't know. That doesn't work either. Well, these words aren't great.
Yeah, I think we need to. I think we need to scrap it.
Okay, Amaru is pile of bricks. Let's look at that one.
Yeah, Amaru is nice. Amarin. How about Amarin?
Amarin.
Amarin.
Amarin is great. Amarin. I like that. And Amari.
That's Amari.
Yeah, that works.
Or I. M-A-R-I.
Oh, and I.
Amari.
Yeah. So that would be the feminine, and Amarin would be the masculine. And if it was they, them, it would be Amarish.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, that works, dude. Yeah. That's way better than what the others are giving.
Right.
But what do you think? You're the one that's going to have to live with this.
Oh no, I like those.
Now let's change the lexicon so that I is feminine, en is masculine, and esh is gender neutral.
Yeah, Amarish. Right. At that, if you wanted to do Naru, you could do Narin, Nari, Narash.
Yeah, that sounds good too. I forget what Naru
was. And then
was.
Kamaru
that was just
would be Kamaren, Kamari, Kamarash.
Yeah. Yeah, I just chose the worst words first. That's what happened.
Yeah, yeah, those are cool.
Yeah. That's a good selection. I leave it to you, but yeah, I mean, these are good. This is a good pool to pull from.
Yeah. Writing them down. This is femme and neutral. Naren.
Oops.
Nari. I'm not doing the. I always say, hey, no offense to anybody who did this, but I always thought it was when people have twins and their names are like so similar.
Oh yeah.
Emily and Emma are twins, you know. I'm like, no, I'm not gonna do that. I'll pick, different letters.
Yeah.
I like that. Kamaran. Yeah, Kamari, Kamarash, yeah.
And one thing we should be cognizant of going forward is that we don't want every character to end with en and I, right?
No, it's just kind of a place that you can start.
It's a good starting place, and it's probably kind of common.
Yeah, and it's common, right? But then you're always going to have those people, even in ancient times, who want to name their kid like binary numbers or something.
Right.
So, right. I named him Fruit Basket. Okay. Yeah, okay, so I like that. So I will pick from these for the twins. And then other characters we have are, of course, like Zeus, Apollo.
Yeah. So I think and we have some we have a lot to go over, and on Zeus in particular, because I have some ideas for the story that I want to write that
Okay.
I need to touch base with you on and make sure we're all aligned before you write yours.
Well, his
Um,
role in this is going to be like as you know, purveyor of the ceremony.
yeah,
So that's how he's going to appear in this. So
yeah,
it's it's not like he's going to be like, you know, involved as much. He's going to be the one presiding over the, the ceremony and whatnot. So he'll be in like public persona,
right.
you
And
know.
Apollo. The other thing that we'll need to work through is what other deities and in antiquity are these people? Are they also, what, in other words, who are we conflating? And so I imagine just looking at it without knowing much, that Apollo and Ra might be conflated. They might not be. It might be Apollo and Horus, or Apollo and
Right.
even Osiris. I don't really know. We'd have to think that through. And then, well, Marduk, I'm believing is because of the work I've already done, I believe is going to be conflated with Zeus, but there might be some other Mesopotamian gods
Hmm.
who are also Apollo. I'm thinking of like who is Enlil, who is huge in Babylonian mythology. Enlil's a big one. And if we can conflate some of I think the Mesopotamian gods with the Greek gods and the Egyptian gods, and
Hmm.
kind of consolidate them, I think that would be ideal. There's also Enki, which is a huge, huge creator god in Babylonian. Like, who is he? Is
Hmm.
that, I don't know. I think we have a little bit of, I don't know that we necessarily need to figure it out for this story,
I don't think so
but it's
because
just something to think
because
about.
just
It's just something to think about.
so one kind of personal quirk that I have as a writer is that I don't like having a lot of characters.
Yeah.
um I mean, they're great for some people, George R. R. Martin, but you know, I tend to want people to focus on the few.
Yeah.
I make references, so kind of my plan for this was, of course, the other gods are going to acknowledge the ceremony that's happening, but here was my reasoning while I was thinking about it. Right, is like the other immortals don't really want to go down there and deal with this story, right? So, but they still want to look good. So the story is that they are watching and stepping by, so this can have their moment. This child can have their moment to become. We're not going to distract from it with our presence when really they don't want to be there. The public excuse is
Yeah.
that they don't want to distract from the solemnity of the ceremony. So it's basically just going to be like Apollo the child and Zeus.
Yeah. Okay.
Apollo as the father and Zeus as the one conducting the ceremony. But there will be gifts, right? I kind of thought I'd make reference to like, oh, on the side of the temple were these gifts from the other immortals or something like that, in honor of this great day. With the plan being that if somehow the child didn't make it, which is a possibility, that the gifts would be stored, would be given amongst the people, right? And so, like, this kind of creates this cool little conflict I have where, like, the people would be secretly hoping this person doesn't make it because they don't want another immortal, and two, they want to get all the crap that was supposed to be gifted to this new immortal.
Right. Yeah. I love
That's
it.
just the way my brain works.
So I guess the only thing we would need to figure out then is Apollo and the sun.
Yeah, Apollo, the
So
child, and Zeus. And you wanted to
yeah, the
do
child.
Marduk? Or did you have a name? I thought you said, did you
Yeah, I
have a name?
did. It's Marzu. I think it's. I
Marzuk?
have to double look. I don't remember. But it was a conflation of Marduk and Zeus. It may have just been Marzus, but
Marzuk. I'll put
I'm
question
not
mark.
100% sure. That's something we can talk about later. I think that's going to be more to do with my story.
Yeah.
And we can just put in whatever name. And my story is him when he's young. So doesn't really matter what his temperament or what he's like in your story. I mean, it can be whatever.
Hmm.
That'll be many, many years later. So we don't really need to develop him too much. Apollo probably needs to be pretty developed. And then
Right.
whoever the kid is.
Right. Right. He had a few. He had Hector, Orpheus,
Ooh,
um,
Orpheus.
Orpheus.
Wouldn't that be fun? Because why does because Orpheus wasn't made to be immortal, so later on, the Orpheus story makes sense
Right.
because
That he
he
does
has to,
eventually get
yeah,
his
yeah,
trip to the underworld.
right,
I like it.
right.
Orpheus.
It's got to be Orpheus.
Gotta be Orpheus. And that's why he was so skilled at singing and stuff, because he
Yeah,
was a half godchild of Apollo. Um,
right,
yeah, Orpheus. Yeah, that works. So Orpheus is supposed to be the one going through this ceremony,
right.
but does not. And then eventually someone could come along and be like, well, what happened to him when he didn't go through his ceremony? Like then he met uh, Eurydice. Eurydice? Eurydice?
Yeah,
I never know. I see the word and I never know how to pronounce it, but um, yeah, so yeah, that's cool. So Orpheus, yeah, so we'll need Orpheus and Apollo names.
yeah. So,
Hmm.
and we can. I think we're reaching about over an hour. So why don't we go ahead and we can say that for next time, and then whatever once you've started to work on this piece, whatever you run into that you need help with,
Yeah, I
and
think
even on story beats and things like that. I mean, if it's and the ritual itself, maybe
yeah,
we
and now
can.
that we've come up with the twins names and stuff, I can probably come up with some ideas with names and
Sure.
just kind of posit them. Hey, if anybody has some ideas who watching this, hey, let us know. What
Yeah.
do you think we should call Apollo and Orpheus in Atlanta?
And since the cast is so small, I'm not all that worried about establishing too much canon. I think this is good. It's a good
Right. Yeah.
scope.
I mean, because basically Apollo, Zeus, and Apollo's child are going to be in that one scene where
Yeah.
the twins kind of steal, the ceremony, and then they're going to be gone. Then it's just going to be the trial, and then the twins going through that. So, I mean, they're not going to be, Apollo's going to be indignant or whatever, like, hey, that's supposed to be my child's day, or whatever. But yeah, so they're not going to be like, they're in it, but they're tertiary characters. They're, you know,
Sure.
so
Yeah.
yeah, and I think I have enough. So I think we're doing every 2 weeks now, and we're doing
Right.
about an hour. So I think I have enough to kind of really get started on like the first couple scenes, and I can kind of come up. I mean, people who are watching are kind of seeing how we kind of come up with the names for the Hermes twins. And so I'll probably kind of use the same type of thinking to come up with Apollo and Orpheus. And then I can probably start writing it.
Yeah,
And
that'd
then
be great.
while I'm writing those first two scenes, when we come back in 2 weeks, I can kind of say how my progress is going and if I have any questions or things that I've run into
Yeah, and if
while
it's
I'm working on.
and if you're in the flow and you're good, we can switch over to story building mine. But we'll see where we're at. We'll just kind of play it by ear.
Yeah.
I think the one that I want to write is going to require a lot more construction because
Oh, okay.
I'm interested in doing a zine series, which comic book style, following out one character through 12
Oh,
issues.
right.
And so it's going to be a much bigger undertaking, story beat wise. And then it's going to also introduce a lot of characters, and we can deal with those characters one in each turn. And it might be that you might want to write in the series too,
Oh, right. Yeah.
So it's not something I'm claiming ownership of necessarily, but I want to get the first one kicked off.
Right.
Which is selfishly because, the 3 books that I wrote before in this setting, this is the story I want to tell. So I'm gonna use this as a moment to rework those books into into the new Lacuna setting.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
I already
No,
have a
this
lot of
is cool.
ideas. We just have to come together on what they all mean.
No, I like what we've done so far. I mean, we came up with the names for the twins. We kind of talked about that a little bit. We kind of came up with what the city looks like. So we both kind of have the idea in our head that I can sit and use that as visual, which I am told is one of my strengths as a writer. So the descriptions and stuff, I'm told by other people. So I'm kind of looking forward to writing that and kind of painting a picture of what this looks like when the twins come into the city for the ceremony or whatever. I'm kind of picturing them like, kind of a little bit in disguise, maybe wearing cloaks and like following the crowd to the ceremony and whatnot. And so we can kind of get a little slice of regular people living in the city, just a little bit. And then they kind of go do their thing and stuff.
Oh, looking forward to it. So there's a bit of house cleaning I want to talk through. So some of you may not be aware, but my game company, Sundertold Scriptorium, is behind the Lacuna project. And this hasn't been significant, but now I might be, because reorganizing a lot of the projects that Sundertold is involved in and kind of housing it under Sundertold, which includes Lacuna. So a lot of what has been branded Lacuna will be branded Sundertold now. We're going to have Lacuna as a channel of Sundertold along with other things, because there's games and actual plays and other things that are happening with Sundertold, and just putting them all under one banner. It's all going to be in the same place, but I just wanted to let listeners know that the YouTube channel is going to change. It's just going to be, under Sundertold instead of Lacuna. That's it. Hope that makes sense. Nothing big, just might be confusing. I think I set it up wrong, ultimately. Wasn't thinking through the needs, but yeah, that's
we're still in infancy.
Yeah.
So, we're still in infancy. It's fine.
Yeah, so if you're a future audience and you're listening to this now, it says, it's like, oh yeah, it's already set up that way,
Yeah.
That's good. That means that what I did now is still going to work in the future.
Yeah, cool. No. Do you feel good? Is there anything else you think I should know before I kind of...
No, this is great. I can't wait to get started. I'm excited to start my project.
Okay, cool.
So,
yeah. So I think
unless you've run into issues, we can probably start that next time.
Look, I got issues, but I don't think this is the appropriate venue for that.
I'm here, Danny, whatever you need.
So in 2 weeks I'll kind of give an update, talk through any things, and then anything that I might need, I think, or move on, so we can use a little bit of time to do that in the beginning, and then we can start working on yours and what you're going to do.
That sounds great.
Weeks. Sweet.
Well, then let's call it. I hope you all enjoyed this session, and we will be back in 2 weeks.
Yeah, share and tell everybody if you're listening.
Yeah, tell everybody.
Let's go and tell everybody. We want people in here and giving us ideas and doing the work for us, essentially.
That's basically what we want. Yeah. So long.
Bye, guys.